Alrighty. We're going to kick off with our second one of these, which is with Tara Jean Stevens. We've got a few people in the call, and I'm sure a few people more will join us. Tara Jean, this is a relationship with you that's been going on for a couple of years. We love chatting with you. We've had you on the podcast a couple of times, but also quite often we'll reach out on socials and keep that connection because we love what we do and we do similar things. You, with your Heaven Bent podcast, has been a huge influence on us, and also I think it has touched many of our listeners as well with the great stuff that you cover. But today, people get to ask you questions. But I'm going to throw over and say, welcome, Tara Jean Stevens.
Hey, thank you so much, guys. It's a pleasure to be with you. And I think we should just we're friends, but I don't know, there's something about our relationship that feels different than just friendship because the stuff that we talk about is so intimate and so close to the surface for us. So I cherish you guys and thank you for having me back.
Yeah, I always feel like whenever something good happens for us, I always feel like I need to tell you. And I'm like, hey, this happened to us and that happened to us. And that just shows that maybe even because of the swishness of your podcast, although I'd like to admit that ours has gotten better since we first interviewed you. But
What's swishness? Is that an
the swishness,
Australian
it's very
word?
swish. It's very
Um,
swish. That's an Australian thing.
It must be a good thing.
Yeah.
yeah, it's like
It's
schmick.
swish.
Oh,
Um,
wicked. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
Let me
So
take that to
polish,
Canada.
yeah, but I
polished.
always feel like I need to tell you, when we have successes and when things are going on and all that kind of stuff. So I think in one way we really look up to you because as I said, when you hit with Heaven Bent, it was just so professional and just so amazing. And we were like, oh, we could never be like that. And we still don't have, music stings and overlays and all that kind of stuff like you do. But I would like to think we've gotten that little bit better. Yeah.
No, we lift each other up, guys.
Yeah,
Oh,
amen,
that's
sister. Praise the
final.
Lord.
It sounds like a Christian chorus. Now, a few people, or a couple of people have joined since Troy said at the start. There's a chat function up the top. Just hit on that, and any of your questions, please fire them into there. Put them there. I'll rack them up. I'll queue them. Troy and I will bounce back and forward and ask your questions to Tara Jean. So please start firing away, people. What are your
Yeah.
questions?
So I've got a question for you, Tara Jean, and the first one is, how you been and what you been up to?
Oh my gosh. Well, I've been very, very well actually over the last, I would say, 8 months or so since I launched season three. I have been elbows deep in season four, and it's a season on the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. They are very well known. I'm not too sure in Australia, but here in North America, in our circles anyway, for having a 24-hour prayer room. And my exploration of this church really was triggered by a large group of former IHOppers who are a little disgruntled, or I would say a lot disgruntled, about their treatment there, how things were dealt with, what they were taught to believe. And I'm sort of helping them work through that. And it's been really difficult to get people who are still within that church to be a part of this season. But as I sort of never give up, I've finally got that. And I think it's allowing not just some balance to the conversation for this season, but also, I don't know, I guess there's just some clarity about what's really happening in this organization. And I cannot wait to give you that season. It's going to launch in September.
I know, Tara Jean, you have shared with us that this was something that you did start and you intended it to be potentially season three, but it got heavy and there was a lot of
Yes.
darkness that you uncovered. Tell us a little bit about that without obviously giving away any spoilers. What was it that made you put it down and pause?
Um, Old spiritual trauma, some stuff that I hadn't necessarily worked out myself in regards to my own upbringing. And I think that that has to do specifically with, yeah, the stories that the people are telling me are very, very dark. I'm going to have quite a few, trigger warnings at the top of episodes. But at the same time, I hope to take care of everyone and keep them as safe as possible and give them a space to learn. And, for those of us who have been to church and are sort of tiptoeing through what we believe now, I hope that it's a space that's helpful. Um, y- you know, uh, when people come to me and tell me these stories and it triggers something in me, I had to take a look at, oh, did I do enough therapy? Maybe I haven't. And that's why I put that season on pause. Season, what I thought was going to be season 3, the IHOP season, I absolutely had to put it on pause. And then I ended up doing season 3, which had such a dark undertone to it. So I don't know if I really escaped it or not. But I went back to my psychologist and did a little bit more work in order to continue the work that I'm doing on Heaven Bent. It's a journey.
So, when you say you go back to therapy, I remember you were the one that introduced both me and a lot of our listeners, I think, to the idea of EMDR for
Yes.
ongoing therapy. Did you revisit that?
No, I only did one like full session of that, which was like maybe 2 or 3 sessions of when they put the things in your hands and they buzz. So these things, this is with the training of my psychologist, and these things buzz in your hands. And while they buzz in your hands, she's triggering you to talk about the things that are traumatizing to you, the things that make you angry, the things, that really light you up and trigger you. And what it did was it just took the edge off everything. It made everything seem not so important. It's not that, because I knew it was important in my life, but it just took the edge off enough that I could talk about these things. And then when I did go back to my psychologist just a few months ago, in order to sort of like go, okay, am I really safe enough to be telling these kinds of stories and creating a space for other people to tell their stories? And after I had a few more conversations with her, I felt like, yeah, man, I'm ready to go. Let's do it. I feel like I'm trained up for this. And the more that I talk to people, especially people who grew up in the church like a lot of us did, I know that there is such an important need for conversations like this. And that's why I love what you guys are doing too. And, teaming up for moments like this where we can sort of deepen that conversation.
Yeah, look, I couldn't agree more. I mean, it's so important. And I think you hear similar feedback from people going, I thought I was alone. I thought I was the only one going through this shit. So I think it is something that's so important to call it out.
Absolutely. I mean, when I first started working on season 1 of Heaven Bent, which was on the Toronto Blessing, which was, the charismatic movement that, I mean, it swept around the world, but it came to my tiny little church in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, which is way up the coast, west coast of Canada, right near the Alaskan Panhandle. And it came to my tiny little town. And I always had questions about it, but I didn't realize I didn't even have a name for it. I didn't even know it was called the Toronto Blessing. And then when I started doing the research, I thought, wait a second, am I the only one who's ever poked around in this, having left the church? But once I launched the season and I started hearing from so many people who were in the same camp as me, they thought that they were alone. And that's because we are made to feel alone. Decades ago, I think the church has slightly adapted to how they deal with people like us, backsliders and people who question what they're teaching us. But back then, I think that they really did make us feel, well, I did anyway, like I was crazy for asking questions, that my questions were dumb, or even just, oh, bless you. Bless your sweet, curious heart, TJ. This is just going to bring you around to Jesus again. Don't worry about it. And that didn't include answers, it just included patronizing me.
Look, a bit of condescending never goes astray, does it? It's great. I am going to pick up on the Toronto Blessing thing, and we've got Kerry who's asked a question. When you're
Hi,
growing up
Carrie.
in the Hello, Kerry. When you're growing up in the Toronto Blessing, did you hear much about Australia?
No, I was so, as I mentioned a moment ago, I was so young at the time. I mean, I was 13, 14, kind of 15 when I got out of it. And again, when it was impacting me, it was in our tiny little church in Prince Rupert. And then I also experienced the effects of it when our youth group would go down to conventions in the interior in Kelowna and Kamloops, which is in the interior southern part of our province here in British Columbia. And I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know that it had spread from Toronto. I didn't know that there was this, you know, conversation happening amongst the elders of the older people in the church about what this was and where it was coming from and the history of Pentecostal movements and revivals. I literally thought we were just so special in this ice rink in Kamloops that God was coming to visit us in a way that he maybe was only visiting people that were on the Benny Hinn show on television. Or, did you guys get Benny Hinn? Do you know Benny Hinn in Australia? He was one of my faves.
Unfortunately, TJ, we did. and he's a charlatan, as is his brother. But a lot of people in Pentecostalism in Australia did and still do actually latch on to the Benny Hinn phenomenon.
My late grandma, may she rest in peace, my grandma Aileen was an on fire Christian who gave a lot of her money to Benny Hinn. And at the time, we thought that she was a good Christian for doing so. So nobody thought to stop her. Nowadays, I think maybe because there's more of an awareness around scams and the way that people get money from the elderly and senior citizens, I think maybe we would have flagged that even if we were still in the church, maybe because she gave almost all of her money away. And it's like, I could have used that right now, please.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
Give me
funny,
your
isn't
money,
it, that
Grandma.
you two were calling out in one of their songs. I can't remember which one it is, but on Rattle and Hum, they're actually calling out the giving of money. The preachers, taking money from the elderly and the sick is actually what they say. Hey, so I've got another question for you. Um, did you consider or did you expect the success when you started Heaven Bent, considering you might have seen it then even as a niche market?
Well, let's see. I have a ridiculous amount of confidence in myself. It's probably more connected to ego and mental health issues, but I do have a lot of confidence in myself. And I knew how hard I was working. I knew that it was the best story. Like why I did, I just had time in my life where I wasn't working for a little bit and I wanted to tell a story via podcast. And I thought, what's the best story that I have to tell? It's the story of the Toronto Blessing and the gold teeth. I didn't even know at the beginning when I started it what the outcome would be, but I did think that I could get a decent audience, and that sort of was secured in me and landed in me when I signed on to a network. And I signed on to a network that's a part of one of the largest media companies in Canada. And what they've provided for me is an incredible amount of marketing, not just here in Canada, but around the world. And now I've got fans in people at a lot of the streaming platforms like Apple Podcasts in Canada and the States, Spotify. There's people there now who are sort of fangirling on my pod, and they're helping me reach a bigger audience as well. So I'm just hoping it can get a little bit bigger because the more people that hear this, the more it spreads. And then I can also start to, at this point, even a few years in, support this work a little bit more. Unfortunately, it's work that I would do entirely for free, and I did for the first few years. But I've now launched something called Heaven Bent Plus, which allows some of my more dedicated listeners to support my work and get bonus content. And that's allowed me to sort of sit back and go, okay, maybe I'm not spending as much time with my family this Saturday morning, but I know that this podcast is going to reach a larger audience and it just makes the work a little bit more worth it.
Yeah, you speak like a Pentecostal there, calling it the work, by the way. We catch ourselves doing
Isn't it?
that.
We
Yeah, the
we
work,
talk like
brother.
Pentecostals all the time.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
still talk like I'm full on like that in my workspaces.
Yeah, we do it too. As a matter of fact, Brian and I are constantly saying to each other, "Oh yeah, praise the Lord, that's great. Oh, look at all the souls we've won this
Yeah,
week with downloads."
it's
So
part of us.
have you had to set boundaries though, personally, for people coming to you with their horror stories or coming to you looking for support?
Oh, I wonder. That is a really, really thought-provoking question. I would say that I don't know. That is a really good question. It makes me even wonder if I should be setting up better boundaries. But at this point, I really am so open to dialogue with my listeners because podcasting is incredibly isolating work. You guys have each other. I have no one but myself. And that's why too, like I like to celebrate things and send you guys a little message and let you know what's good for me. And uh, um, you know, in receiving messages from people. I get so excited every time I get a message. Sometimes the conversation, and it has happened several times, can go down a path where I realize this person needs support from real people in their real life. And then I will encourage them to do that. I've only ever had to block one or two people who, for some reason, decided that I was the one that was going to save them. I had one person I had to block because he had decided that I was the Antichrist. I think he was having some mental health issues, but kind of frightened me enough that I blocked him. And those are the kind of situations that, oh, I'm getting a little clap. I see the emoji. Thank you. Yeah, I do have to set some boundaries. So yeah, maybe I'll give myself a little pat on my back. That's my boundary is I block people if they make me uncomfortable and don't receive my suggestions to go find help somewhere else. But when people reach out, usually and often when I hear from people, it starts off with an apology because they think they might be the only one reaching out and that they're bothering me. But really, it is a validation of my work that it's connecting with people. And it is a huge encouragement for me to keep going and do more.
Yeah, what we've done with that is because I think there's a responsibility that weighs on you when people come to you and go, I don't, because we said before, people think they're alone. So when you want to connect them up, and I guess we've formed a bit of an informal and probably a bit more formal these days partnership with Recovering from Religion and a secular therapy project to connect people in with some of those formal supports that they can get, because it's a bit of a niche as well. It's a niche within a niche. Getting a therapist that understands religious trauma, because it's a very real thing. So I think that ability to be able to partner or at least have some referral pathways for people to find that help is so incredibly beneficial.
I don't know if it's like this for you guys in Australia. I think it's less or so here in Canada than it is in the States, but majority of my listeners have just sort of fostered in America. And a lot of the issues that people who are deconstructing or dealing with religious trauma are running into when they find a therapist in America is that they either have already just deep rooted or really sort of maybe even lighthearted attachments to the church and evangelical beliefs. And so how do you come to them and really unpack that in a really true way when they're already rooted in the belief that Jesus died on the cross for your sins and all that kind of stuff. So really it depends. And maybe some people who are working through spiritual trauma, maybe they do want to deal with a Christian therapist. I guess it's just flagging, make sure when you're asking for help, you know who you're spilling your guts to.
Yeah, exactly. And we agree. Hey, Roz had a question coming back to the IHOP season that you're going to release in September. She wants to know what made the conversations with IHOP so traumatic, and maybe I'll just add on to that. Relative to the questions, excuse me, relative to the conversations that you had about other churches, why IHOP? Why was it so intense? And then she also says that the 24-hour prayer room is actually not uncommon. It's maybe weird, but there's a lot of people that are doing that in other churches.
Yeah, I guess the thing with IHOP is that they've been doing it since 1999 nonstop. And that for me, and here in North America anyway, it was one of those places where I could have wound up myself. And I think that's also, why I did Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry in season 2. The connection there was that's somewhere that I could have wound up. There are 3 places where I feel like I could have wound up if I hadn't left the church after I left high school. One was YWAM. My mom wanted me to go on one of those ships and go travel around the world, building things and praying for people. And the other one was Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry. And then also hearing about the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. Those were sort of these 2 places where my life could have taken a totally different spin. So there's a personal sort of trigger to it, I think, that makes it more important to me. But also, all the lesser so with season 3 in the South, but with the Toronto Blessing, with Bethel School of Supernatural Ministry, Bethel Church in Reading, and IHOP, they all run in similar circles. So even though they have distinct leaders, that kind of thing, and maybe even varying beliefs and what they think is important and what they focus on, they run in similar circles. People who go to IHOP wind up at, BSSM in Reading. They go to Toronto when they hear the Spirit is moving. So it's all sort of connected in a way that feels very at home to me. And I think maybe an extension too on that question was like, why? I think was it like, why was it so triggering? And I mean, I'll just tell you, like the stories that I'm hearing are of extreme fasting, of fatal incidents of people from fasting being a very demanded sort of spiritual practice within that church. And we're talking about young people, young women who are already dealing with eating disorders. I'm talking about sexual assaults and rapes, and the manner in which they were dealt with is so shocking to me that I'm still at a point now where I'm having to find out, is that really true? Did that person who just told, did that really happen? Because I can't imagine any person who calls them a good Christian dealing with a situation like that. So there's a lot of vetting going on with this season as well in regards to who's telling the truth, and not even the truth, but there's like different versions of the truth in this world. You can get five people that were all in the same room in the same meeting telling me an entire different story. So it's just been very challenging to me to try to make sure that the season that I present to you guys is as close to the truth as possible, or at least creating language in my voiceovers that allow you guys to know, hey, this is up for debate. Not everybody thinks this, but here's what this person thinks. That's definitely on my plate right now and something that I'm actively working on as I prepare to launch the season in September.
I mean, four people in one room with a different story. I mean, that would never happen and go into a Bible, would it?
No, never.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We could have the synoptics and the book of Tara, right?
That's right. Praise the Lord.
Everything's clear when the spirit's moving, right?
Yes. So we've got another question from Dave. Dave's asking, has anything truly shocked you in the research that you've done over the last 3 seasons of the podcast?
Has anything truly shocked me? I would say at the end of season 1, lots of things have truly shocked me, honestly. Nothing that would shock me back into believing or returning to church. That's never going to happen in my life. Although, I have a lot of people who I speak with, and members of my family and members from my church, people who helped raise me in the church, who all think that this is just a pathway for me coming back to God. And I'm like, dudes, it's not gonna happen. Like, it's not gonna happen. But they think because I'm obsessed that it will lead me back eventually. But I don't know. I think there's way too many of us out here to really go there. What was the question again?
Oh, sorry, TJ. Has anything truly shocked you?
Oh yeah, truly shocked
Yeah.
me. So, excuse me. At the end of season 1, when I was still in the development stage, I flew back to Prince Rupert. I live in Vancouver, so I flew back to Prince Rupert to actually visit my childhood church. And I had made arrangements to interview some of the women who had made claims of receiving gold teeth during the Toronto Blessing. And that really was one of the stories that triggered me to create the first season in the first place, was my confusion over these people, these Christians, these women, these leaders in my life that had shown us their gold teeth, and we'd lined up to see them in church. They wouldn't lie, so they must have supernatural gold teeth in their mouth. And I think the shocking realization for me was when I went home to Prince Rupert and I talked to them about their gold teeth, that in the end, it really wasn't about whether or not they got a gold tooth, because there's just dental records all over the place. I mean, there's just, even the church said a lot of this didn't really happen. They leave space for, oh yeah, some of them are real, but any of the ones that you actually look into, you can find dental records, and it's just incredibly disappointing and takes the wind out of the sails of this. But what shocked me was I realized the value and worth of these stories, the symbolism of the gold teeth in these people's lives were so palpable and so helpful. It helped them deal with grief and their own personal trauma and real life issues. It helped them deal with their own mental health issues, even though the rest of us might look and say you're having a mental health crackdown by even saying that you have a gold tooth. I think these conversations were important to me and really shifted the way that I think about these people in this space and the things that I believed, in a way that has allowed me to continue. I think that if those conversations hadn't moved me in that way, that I saw value in these stories instead of just maybe deception or silliness, or, people getting carried away, or mania, or like like whatever. All those things like didn't matter anymore, because I realized that the stories had worth. And that is something that as well that I've had to talk to when we're talking about getting therapy, that is something that I've had to talk about too, because part of the issue for me was being angry that I believed something that wasn't true for so long. And I made it really black and white, just as I had when I was a fundamental Christian. It was like, well, I found fault in it. It's all frickin' garbage. Throw it all in the trash. Well, guess what? I've realized not all of it is trash. Some of it is the world is just so meaningless. Why does it really matter if this woman finds comfort in saying that she had a gold tooth? I mean, was I damaged from it? Do I feel like maybe that the church owes me an apology for leading me astray? Maybe a little, but when it comes down to the heart of it, they're not these evil people that meant to fool us. They really do believe, you know? It's difficult. It's very difficult.
I think Tara Jean, that and one of the things that I've sort of been looking at lately, we just did an episode on Keith Green, and the way that the stories become mythologized. That it's not necessarily that people are out to deceive. It's just that these stories become embellished, and it's interesting because I've sort of traced that back to the stories of the saints, and also the stories of these revivals that happened, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, etc. It's really, you can see how that embellishment sort of happens, that it becomes a story that maybe isn't true. It's someone's interpretation or someone's recollection, but then it becomes, for want of a better word, canonized. So I think you're 100% right. I think no one's out to deceive. It's just, it sort of grows organically in a way.
Google alerts in my Gmail for all the different words that are, impacting Heaven Bent and influencing Heaven Bent, like churches and scandals and, the different churches I've researched. And the other day I got one in the Globe and Mail that came up about this network of churches in England, I think, and America. And I can't remember which church it was, but they had uncovered this mass cover up over decades of sexual assaults, right? So these women coming forward and claiming that men in the church had been assaulting them or raping them, and the church just leaning on the men and making the women suffer for coming forward, lifting the men up who say that nothing happened, and completely trashing the women. And in there, I'm like, oh, these devils. There's also leaders who are raping people and, themselves, and these terrible people, and they're twisting the Christian faith into, getting these women to take off their clothes. It's like really evil. And then I go to, I think about the people in my church, or even honestly, the people that I'm researching, the leaders that I'm researching in IHOP. And I'm like, so you said that he, somebody would say, this guy, this leader here, is a really great guy. And then in the next breath, she's talking about something terrible that he did to her. So it's very confusing how you can think the heart of someone is in the right place, Christian wise, and then all these bad things happen. I don't know. I guess I'm just sort of like really in this confusing space about, am I trying to out some church that is doing evil on purpose? No, and it makes it more difficult. It just makes it much more difficult because they think their heart is in the right place. They're just doing things wrong.
So picking up on that same vein, TJ, Roz has asked, firstly, fangirl comment to Tara. I like the way you go into depth in these groups and remain curious rather than angry. But why and how do you manage to do this?
Well, because I'm a storyteller. I mean, really, it comes down to this is what I do. Well, okay. I'm a storyteller. So in my life and my careers, I've been an actor and a playwright. I host a radio show every morning. I've hosted morning television. I now host a podcast. I love to tell stories. However, in my work as a playwright and now as a podcaster, lesser so in my work in, morning radio, but in theater and in podcasting, I have told intimate stories about my own life with little shame or disregard for maybe it's not disregard for my family, but let's say when I decided to make this podcast, I did very first thing that I did was go to my parents and say, I'm going to air out our dirty laundry in a public podcast, and it's probably going to get a lot of ears on it. Are you okay with that? And they were okay with that only because they're totally used to me doing that. I mean, I've written plays before about some pretty personal things that happened in our family, let's say, that kind of thing. And I think my family's just sort of used to it. So there is part of me that worries about stepping on people's toes and hurting people's feelings. And I think I do sort of maybe tread that too carefully in the pod. Sometimes people are like, hey, you should have gone way harder on that person. But I don't want anyone to have their feelings hurt. I just want to have a conversation and be able to, to get a little bit deeper into what this is all about and how it's impacted our lives.
So Kerry says this is not a question, and I'd like to clarify that it's not a question. So let's call it a talking point. She says, I love your little
Noted, Carrie.
section in the most recent podcast on Amy Semple McPherson.
Oh yeah, wasn't that exciting? That could have been a whole season in itself. And Carrie, you probably know that's true, right? I mean, that's the birth of the Foursquare Church, I believe. And I mean, there's a whole tale in that in itself. I actually toiled about whether or not to include her story in that season because I thought, wait a second, I might want to do this as its own season. But it just had such a, I felt like it was just, there was a little bit of foreshadowing in her story with the story that I was telling in season 3. So I decided to include it. And also at the time I was like, you never know. Am I just going to stop after this? Will I actually ever do that next season on IHOP? Because by the end of every season, by the time I launch, I'm just so brain dead from being so deep inside of it and putting myself and my work out there so hard. It's a little, I have to sort of go in a hole. But every single time I've launched a season, it literally the next day I'm like back at it. So whatever. On I go.
TJ the Puppet Master.
Yeah.
So got a question here from Darren. I hear you say the word triggering a lot. Do you feel that you're still deeply affected by the past? And I think you've answered that to a degree. Or are you just pissed off that this shit happens?
I would say I do use the word triggering a lot. I would say that other people have used that word with me a lot in their feedback about the show. So I've sort of started to use it way more. I would say I am way more curious than I am angry. I just am. I mean, if you talked to me 10 years ago, there's no way if I had decided to, if I had had that space in my life, oh, the cutest bird just landed at my window. Sorry. Bird. So if I had, excuse me, if I had decided to launch this podcast and start doing this podcast 10 years ago before I got the therapy that I talked about when we started yapping here, it would have been a scandalous podcast exposing the church. You would have heard from nobody but ex-Christians. And I would have been dealing with my own anger and, really outing things. Instead, I've created a space where it is so important for me to have on fire Christian voices. It is so important for me to hear from people who are still inside the church because it's balanced, but also because of my curiosity. Otherwise, we're all just talking to ourselves in a big fat room. I am way more interested in hearing diverse points of view. And also at the same time, I mean, if it was some sort of like scandalous, just bitching on everything and tearing everything apart and not trying to find the good in anything, none of these Christians would have ever been a part of this season. So I am purposefully also creating a space that they will allow me to, welcome them into. So sometimes I get a little bit like, should I not be doing that? Is that sort of pandering to Christian beliefs and Christianity in a way that used to make me so angry? I don't know. That's maybe something I still think about a lot.
Okay, Dave has a question for you now, and he says, as we know, Bethel is a well-known church worldwide, or at least it is in churches. Have you had much negative or positive feedback from the Bethel season?
A lot of positive, really. I mean, I think that the people who have negative reactions to my pod don't keep listening, right? Because the people who probably don't want to listen in general, I'm sure there's people who are just like, oh, I don't like this girl, whatever, I'm out, or this isn't the pod for me, I'm out. Or one person was like, there's too much music, I don't like all the music. And that was their complaint. I'm like, okay, whatever. But in general, I would say that the people who listen to Heaven Bent, they keep listening because it's a space for them that they feel comfortable in. Um, uh, the negative feedback that I received, again, was like people thinking I was the Antichrist. I've had warnings from other people that sort of, it wasn't necessarily negative feedback, but people saying, you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do this. There's going to be people from this church that are going to, there's people in this church that have guns. They're stockpiling guns, Tara. You don't want to get involved in this. Okay, that maybe got me upset for one day, but life carries on, right? And that's actually, I will flag, is something that's coming up a lot here in North America is the rumors or stories of really big up there Christians who are, waiting for the end times and expecting Jesus to come back any second in the clouds. There is stories of a lot of these people stockpiling guns in preparation for full-on war against the government or against, the devil and his people, whoever his leaders are. So that's sort of like a kind of like a dark underlining thread right now. It doesn't make me feel threatened, but it's a conversation that keeps coming up a lot. And that's actually been a little surprising and concerning the last year.
It's a little bit of a pet project of mine. Troy knows that I love the QAnon stuff, but we've seen it here. We had in Queensland in Australia, we had a shooting of police officers who were killed by three people who were holed up. These people were teachers or principals of a school, and they decided end times was coming, that COVID was the point where that had really triggered that, and they holed up on a property and they shot their neighbour and they shot a couple of police officers, and they consequently were killed as well. So we are hearing the same thing, and I think seeing the same thing. There's definitely extremists everywhere. I have another comment/question from Dave, more of a comment, so it'd be good for you to give your perspective on it. I know you briefly mentioned in season 1, I think the Lonnie Frisbee and the Jesus movement could be a good season 2. What I've seen is very sanitized, and there has to be more to it. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think if I remember correctly, even in that season, I think I flagged like there's way more to this story. It could have been a season unto itself. My issue with the Lonnie Frisbee story is that he's not here to tell a story. And the people who are telling the story for him are the people from his church who tell a story of him, having demons of homosexuality, of him, uh, you know, re- repenting for those actions and becoming clean and, maybe dying as like, more of a pure man that wasn't as hassled by all of that. But that just does not seem to be true if you dig into that story even a little bit. And there was something about his story that just felt like it's its own world. And I feel like people who know him really, really closely, you'd have to talk to a lot of people to really get the guts of it out. But he's one of those people that comes up a hell of a lot. There are so many incredible stories about his use of, LSD in regards to his spiritual experiences. I just wish that he had lived long enough to maybe share some of those in a way that those of us who have fallen away from the church could receive, because I think he was a really incredible person. I think he was really fascinating, and I'd still love to learn more about him. The one of the people who I interviewed in regards to his life stopped talking to me after I launched this season, so I'm not too sure if he was maybe unhappy with his involvement there or not, but he gave me permission, excuse me, to use that audio, so I'm running with it.
Can you imagine
Tara-Jean,
if Lonnie Frisbee started an LSD church? How cool
Yeah,
would
like the
that
world
be?
could be different. The
Absolutely.
whole world could be different.
Sorry, Troy.
yeah, that's right. Well, he kind of did start an LSG church in the sense that he, started reaching out to all these sort of Jesus people and all these hippies, and that was a movement that was, triggered by drug culture. But anyway, I have a question. This is from me. I'm from where I'm sitting. I'm looking over your right hand shoulder, and I see a picture of a goose with a party hat and a necklace on. What the hell is going on with that?
It's just a painting. You want to see it
Of
close?
of
It's just
what?
it's a goose.
It is a goose. Oh, okay. See, I thought I was being funny, but it is a goose.
It's so cute. Hold on. I couldn't hear you for a second. You got to see this beautiful photo. Or it's a
Yeah,
it's a
cool.
painting.
All right,
Isn't
cool.
that
Yeah.
cute?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I was looking at it
I
going,
like her.
I thought I was being funny. I thought you were going to say it's a lighthouse or something like this from a
No, it
distance.
really is. It really is like a goose with a pearl necklace on.
Okay, lovely.
Thanks for
Lovely.
thanks for noticing.
Yeah, no problem. No problem. So, Tara Jean, what about, okay, we have talked about the emotional toll of what this, does to you when you're researching and everything. How do you cleanse yourself when you step away? I know you did say that the day after, and I totally relate. I get overwhelmed, like I can't do this anymore. And then the next day I'm researching or
Back in
whatever.
it.
But how do you cleanse yourself?
I try to limit the amount that I talk to my family and even other people about the work that I'm doing. So it's sort of isolated to my computer, the space where I do my work. I find that I'm so deep into this that if I even try to start unpacking the work, whatever I'm working on with my husband, let's say, he just I just see him sort of his eyes roll sort of roll back in his head. He doesn't understand because he's not from the church either. So it's like a whole other layer of him not really understanding what I'm talking about. So I've just contained the work to a space, now is when I work. I'm not constantly, for example, like with my radio show, I'm constantly prepping. I'm constantly thinking, what can I talk about tomorrow? Did you just say something that can inspire me? Did my kids just say something? Did I Google something? That work is sort of like all encompassing in my life. But with my podcast work, I do have to contain it to a certain amount of space. I'm going to work on this for an hour and then I'm going to close my computer and that world is done for me. So there's a bit of a container to it, I think.
Thanks, TJ. Got another question from Roz. And Roz says, how common is it for weird groups, and I think we're all in weird groups, to think that they are the only ones with the truth? This could be either as a single church or a collection of churches or a subculture. Is there a prerequisite for getting toxic?
Ooh. Well, I know that, IHOP, for example, for the next season, I'm working on season 4, is very much in that world. They do, and I think that's why it's not just that people come there for 2 or 3 years or 10 months for a program and then go back to their hometowns. Like sometimes people stay there for 10, 20 years, like it turns into their whole life. And that's because they are specifically told if they leave that they will miss out on the gifts that are promised to the people who are keeping the fire alive in their specific prayer room. So it does become something that's incredibly isolating and very I find it I wouldn't say this in my season. I'll say this with you guys right now. I find it very obnoxious and egotistical to imagine, especially, Kansas City, Missouri, this, with respect, this like dink of a city in America, that's going to be where God decides to do the most important work in the entire universe in the history of the world. It's obnoxious. It's honestly
Oh, Tara
incredibly
Jean, I
obnoxious.
was I was in a church that was the truth, and it was started by a delicatessen owner from Hawthorne here in a suburb of Melbourne. And Jesus was born in a manger. So get with the program, sister.
Yeah, really, right? Get my head around it. But it unfortunately flirts with what we hear about cults that sometimes have nothing to do with Christianity. It often is we are the chosen people. I'm watching right now a Netflix. I don't know if it launched there for you guys, but there's one on David Koresh from Waco, which is, this was one of like the biggest battles on American soil with guns and stuff like that and agents since the Civil War. And it was a group of people who thought that their leader, David Koresh, well, because he told them that he was actually Jesus. And so here they are in Waco, Texas, middle of freaking nowhere, Texas, saying that we are the chosen people, that this is the moment God has, pointed out and made to happen. It's just, still shocks me how people can think that it's them. But that is also what I thought when I was growing up. I thought that God was moving in those services, those youth services that I went to in the ice rinks and Kamloops. I thought that God was moving there in a way that he wasn't moving anywhere else. So that was me too, thinking that, it's just so obnoxious. And that stuff does bother me because sometimes, and I would say more so when I was like in my angry phase in my earlier 30s and late 20s. If I thought, and I still feel like I have a pretty good Christian radar. Like if a band releases a song and you wouldn't, it's just a pop song. I'm like, they're Christians. I can hear it. I bet you guys can too. There's something about the lyrics or the way that they sing, and that they're coming from a church atmosphere or that they're trying to sort of embed maybe some spiritual, religious Christian beliefs in there. You can just sort of feel it. And for a long time, I would meet these people and I would just find them so smug. And but really now I just know it's just the light of Jesus, right? It's just the knowledge for them of knowing that you are a chosen one, that you have figured out the truth, that you have figured out the answers to the universe. Why wouldn't you be smug if you thought that? It's almost like I have to give I have to give it to them.
Got another question for you now, and this is from long-time listener, first-time caller.
Love
She
it.
says, I'm interested in the role of women in Pentecostal culture. In doing the podcast, do you feel that you've gained a greater understanding? And do you think, or she says, do you see signs of change?
I see signs of change in regards to in Canada anyway. What I'm seeing a change in is not necessarily the women leadership, because I still feel like every church I know about has a male pastor and not a female pastor. Where I really see a shift in a lot of churches is just in regards to us LGBTQ plus AI, you know what I mean? Like all this, acceptance of people in queer communities. Some of these churches that, used to be like the church I knew now have gay pastors, like two husbands that are running the church. I feel like that's for some reason taking off more than women in leadership. But again, I'm not in the church. I'm just here in my silly little office making a podcast and interviewing people from the church from time to time. But one thing that I did learn, especially with doing season 3 on Emmanuel Church of Christ, is that there is a long history in Pentecostalism of women being leaders and women being incredibly powerful orators and speakers and community caretakers, and that the church was the sort of container for that. I don't know if that's something that's continuing now, because there's way too much misogyny in the church, I think, for it to really go the full distance.
Thanks, TJ. Alrighty. So Darren is also asking, I know you've spoken about the upcoming season will be IHOP, but Darren says there's so many groups that would make a great fit for your podcast, and I think we all agree that. Where do you see it going next?
Well, I think I definitely, in my back pocket, I've always thought that I would do a season on YWAM, because I mentioned earlier it was one of those places, as well as IHOP and Bethel, where if I'd stayed in the church, I feel like I could have wound up there myself. I just feel like there's a lot still playing out with YWAM right now, with court cases and things like that. I'm sure a lot of you are more aware of that because it's Australia based for the most part, with the sexual assault stuff. So I feel like I'm sort of just waiting in the background for that to sort of play out and decide if it's something I want to tackle. Although there was also something really special about telling a story in, let's say, season 3, about a church that people hadn't heard about before, that you couldn't Google necessarily and learn all the things that you did in my pod. Like, I will never do Hillsong. I will never do, like, I'm not going to touch those. There's so many people that have already touched them. There's all these Netflix things. There's, that's definitely not something I want to touch. Maybe I would have considered that years ago before it exploded, but there's a lot of us doing work like this now.
It's funny you mentioned the Hillsong thing, because I can remember when we first interviewed you a number of years ago, we said, oh, Hillsong, Hillsong. And you were like, yeah, it's a possibility. And I was thinking about this morning and thinking, oh God, don't do Hillsong. There's so many podcasts and so much done. I mean, what else is there left to say?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm
So
not saying it. You can all say it.
yeah. It's interesting what you're saying about YWAM too, because we have slowly been sort of uncovering things with YWAM. I mean, we all have stories. Well, I shouldn't say we all have stories. We all know people who have stories about YWAM and the horrible things that have happened to them in YWAM. But we interviewed a guy by the name of Dave Andrews, who was actually excommunicated from YWAM in the 70s when he was part of the Jesus People movement. And that was just, and he was a leader, and he was completely shut down. So that was really interesting. But also with our Keith Green episode and hearing about how YWAM swept in and took over Last Days Ministries after Keith Green died was really interesting as well. So it just seems like YWAM, like, whilst everybody knows, I don't know that there's been an expose yet, has there? I don't think anyone has really told the YWAM story yet.
Nothing that I've flagged like I have, let's say, with Hillsong, where I went, that's done. See ya. That's not going to be me, because I've heard the pod, or, I'll even, people will write me and say, hey, TJ, you should listen to this podcast because they're doing, what you're doing. Well, it's not going to, it's just making me go, okay, yeah, no, not talking about that. Not talking about that. Yeah, it's been done.
So TJ, I'm going to actually throw it to you to go, is there anything you want to chat about Is there anything that you want to say to people who are here or who are going to be watching this broadcast later? Anything that you want to give them a little bit of your pearls of wisdom or anything? It's an open floor to you.
Sure. I will say the thing that came to mind when you said that was just something that's on my mind a lot lately, and that has to do with rapture anxiety. I don't know if you guys have heard that term before. I've mentioned it on my pod a few times, I think. It's only a term that I learned about a few years ago, but it really is something I've latched onto because even though I am not in the church anymore, I don't believe in any of that anymore outside of it being mythological almost, is the fact that even though I don't believe that when I'm driving down the highway a couple days ago with my daughter, and it was a kind of stormy day while the sun was setting, and all of a sudden the sun bust out of the clouds and you could see the rain falling and the sun, and there was a rainbow and a hole where the sun was coming through, and it looked just like what I'd seen in movies and heard the pastors describing about that moment when Jesus is going to come down in a physical form, floating down to take us all back to heaven and save us from this hell on earth, right? And when that happens, there is something in me that panics or gets excited as if it's really going to happen. That does not go away. I can't get that out of me. It's in my body, it's in my mind, my blood, my feelings. And my daughter is, she's 14 years old, and she knows that, she knows what I went through and knows, but she's never been to church. I won't let her go to church. She just sort of understands where I'm coming from. And she couldn't really understand why I was getting all emotional. Nature doing nature's thing. I just can't stop thinking and being activated by those thoughts that I don't even believe it anymore. And I don't even know if I want to say goodbye to it. It's maybe just like I say rapture anxiety because there is still those moments where I find myself suddenly alone in a quiet house where I go, where's my family? Where's Just like I used to with my mom, I thought my mom had been taken up by the rapture and I'd been left home, and really she's just in the laundry room with the door closed, right? So there's those things, but I think that I'm okay with still latching on to whatever this feeling is, these things that happen in me, because it's exciting. It makes me feel alive. It sort of reminds me of feeling young and naive and hopeful and excited about the world. So I guess I'll still play that game, if it's something that I'm choosing to do, that when I see that moment in the clouds, I have a little flutter of excitement that, that Jesus is coming back.
Yeah, look, it's a real thing. I mean, you said, I'm sure you guys have heard it, absolutely. And people, I think it's associated with that whole where do I go next also. But
Yes, it
just
is. It is.
it
Yeah.
totally is. It's tied up with the hell thing. And just to plug that Bart Ehrman has just brought out a new book called Armageddon, which I'm sure a lot of people know about who will be watching this. And he really does address this, but also in the podcast that we dropped to our Patreon subscribers yesterday, we do speak to him a little bit about the rapture, and also that will go out to the general audience next week. So yes, very on theme. So well done. It's like the Lord was speaking to us both.
Well, they did tell me when I was growing up that I would have prophetic work or prophetic words in my life that would, I guess I was told like I would do something with my voice and I would have, some kind of prophetic powers. I don't know if that's really happened, but maybe
Yeah,
maybe I do have a little of it.
I was told that I was going to have what was it? I was going to be a man after God's own heart, which is what they said to David a lot, which is kind of nice when you think about that. If God
Sure.
is
How
good,
flattering.
that's a nice thing to be. But I found out recently that pastor has now left the ministry and is actually managing medical centers. So I don't know how much authority I can place on that word anymore. It would have been better
Probably
if he
not a
was.
hell of a lot, bud.
Yeah, well, it would have been better if he was, caught up in some sort of financial scandal and still in the ministry, because then I could hold on to that word. Tara Jean, I'm just looking at time, and we know that you're busy, and it's you're getting on with your Friday night over in Canada.
Yeah, as
Whereas
I said,
we're
this is not water.
That's right, yeah. Whereas ours, it's all coffee, and we're all getting started. So we want to really thank you for not only being here today and taking the time to field the questions, but also for being a friend of our pod. and for, for what you do as well. It's just wonderful. Brian, I don't know if you want to turn your camera on and come on and let's gush all over our great friend Tara Jean. But yeah, we're just really grateful to you, and thank you for your
Oh, I'm
support.
grateful for you.
Yeah, well, thank
I'm
you for your
grateful for
support.
you
We
guys.
reached out to you and said, hey, we're doing this Patreon thing, and we'd love our, listeners to be able to talk to you. And it just made sense that you would be one of the first people that we reached out to. So thanks so much for doing that.
Yeah, thank you guys. And thank you to everyone who came. Like, I didn't see your faces, but I see your names. And oh, now I'm getting all emotional because the spirit moves and then I start crying. But I appreciate you all for showing up and your curiosity about my pod and, everything that we're talking about here, because clearly we're all in some kind of similar boat, right?
Yeah, well, you've got global fans, which is awesome. I remember when we first interviewed you and you were saying, oh, it's peaking in, I can't remember what country you said, Norway or,
And
Nigeria
all of a
or
sudden,
something
like,
like that.
why is it kicking off in Croatia today? I don't know, but go for
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. So yeah, you've got fans in Australia. We know that your podcast, we're not just saying this in our group. When you release episodes, conversations go off where, you're doing great work.
Thanks, guys. You too.
Thank you, TJ. I'm not going to add any more to that. I gushed at the start. I'll bookend it by gushing at the end by just reiterating what Troy said. You are not only a friend of the pod, but a friend of ours. So thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being a legend, and thank you for being
Stop it.
a good Canadian.
I do my best. I do my
And
best.
yes, that is good.
Yeah, I was
Thanks,
thinking about how to
everybody.
introduce you, and I was going to say, Canada has their own bacon. They have ice hockey. They have maple syrup, and they have Tara Jean Stevens.
You're so silly. I'll take it. I'll take it. Thank you,
And
guys.
thank you. Justin Trudeau out, TJ Stevens in.